Okay, hello and welcome to the Department of Social Sciences and Psychology event. We have a visitor here to talk about the psychology program at the University of Maine in Farmington. And she's going to be introducing herself and talking about her work and then explaining why she thinks transferring from KVCC to University of Maine in Farmington is a good idea. And so most of our conversation will be her leading it. I may ask some questions, and if anybody's actually watching this live, you can certainly pipe in with the into the chat and put some questions out there that we can answer. So
Great.
here we go.
Thanks, Mark. So I am Dr. Natasha Lekesh, and I've been at the University of Maine Farmington for 10 years now. I'm a clinical psychologist, so I teach a lot of our counseling-oriented courses. And my research was actually has been in social psychology, and I've looked at personal values. Personal values and how they link to well-being and different types of values, like more pro-social values versus materialistic values. Most recently, I did a study that was published in the Journal of Humanistic Psychology, where I tested my students in a death and dying class before and after the class to see how the course impacted their attitudes towards death and dying, their values, and their well-being. So often, I just had actually an advisee in my office who said, "You're teaching a class on death and dying. That sounds morbid." And that tends to be the reaction, and people's families and friends react that way as well. And in fact, the course ends up being a lot about how to live well and about life and living, and how when we confront those existential issues, it causes us to shift our values or be more present. And so I ended up I compared those students to students taking my abnormal psychology class.
Okay, as a control.
Yeah, it's not a perfect design because I couldn't randomly assign students to take abnormal or death and dying. So it was more like a comparison group. But I did find that students in the death and dying class had more positive attitudes towards death and dying after. They also had more, their values shifted a little bit towards more pro-social values compared to materialistic values. And their vitality, so I measured well-being in a number of ways, but their vitality actually, there was a statistical increase in their vitality. So
That's cool.
yeah.
Yeah, that interests me too, because we have a death and dying class here, and you're a social psychologist, and how do you think our society views death and dying in general, and how does the course try to
yeah.
deal with it?
So I feel like maybe it's shifting a little bit. Like I see more in the media around, I don't know if it's just me because I notice these things more because I teach the class, but I've noticed like conversation around it more. Some big cities have these things called death cafes where you get together with strangers and it's just an opportunity to talk about like issues around death and dying. But generally, I would say it's a pretty taboo topic, and it's one that people don't want to talk about. And the reaction of, oh, it's morbid. And there's a lot of resistance when people are sick and are dying. Family members don't want to talk about it and they sort of deny it. And so
yet at the same time, I know in my travels we go on tours, and almost every city we've ever been to has a graveyard tour.
Oh, interesting.
All kinds of death on television and all kinds of fascination
Yes.
with Halloweenish
Yeah.
sort of images of death, and talking about people who have died.
Yeah.
And so there's maybe it's personal. is it personal when it has to do with me and somebody close? Maybe I'm a little bit
Right. You
more.
want to avoid it. And I think it's normal to avoid it. For years I would talk to my students about how I was a bit of a hypocrite because I hadn't done my own will, even though like I'm in, in this class and sort of talking about the importance of preparing for death and that we never know when it's going to happen. And then I have this this man, Chuck Lakin, who comes every year, and he makes his own coffins. He's at the Common Ground Fair every year, building his own coffins. And he also travels around the state teaching people about all their options when someone dies. So, we think the only option is to call a funeral director and have the body embalmed and go through that whole process, but there's actually a lot of options. And so he talks about that, and he was in the class, and I'm Canadian. My family and I moved here from Montreal, and one of the things he said was that your kids will go into the foster care system if both you and your husband die. And it was sort of a wake up moment for me. Like, it's just irresponsible not to have like outlined like who takes my kids if that happens. So I ended up doing my will, and the year I did it, I shared it with the students in the death and dying class, and they said, well, you should get it notarized. And I said, actually, in Maine, you're not required to have your will notarized, but I said, but we could. There's someone on campus who knows. So in the middle of the class, we went over
somebody's door.
We went over, and two of the students in the class witnessed me signing the will. So that was kind of cool.
Neat. What a great experience that is.
Yeah.
But these kind of wake up calls, as to just specific to that death and dying class, of wake up calls as to that is a part of life. And we often don't want to think about it until we're forced to think about it. And sometimes maybe it's too late.
Yeah. So one of the unique things about UMF, I think, is that you said you have a death and dying class at KVCC, which I think is really cool. But like for me, I never had that opportunity, not in my undergrad, not in my master's, not in my PhD, to take a course on death and dying. And yet I was trained in psychology education and then did my PhD in clinical psychology. So that's one of the classes we offer, but we have a lot of unique courses, I think. We have a lot of counseling-oriented courses, as well as the more core psychology classes, like social psychology, for example. But unlike a program, say, at USM that has a more traditional sequence of psychology classes, which is what I did I did my undergrad at McGill, but it was, more that research-based kind of. We have a lot of, an intro to counseling course, a psychotherapeutic methods. I teach classes on both couples counseling, and this semester I'm actually doing one on sex therapy. And sex and couples therapy is an area that I'm trained in. So when I was in my first year at UMF, there were a couple students who were interested in that background, and they came to me and they said, can you do a class on sex therapy? And I was like, it's not really an undergraduate level course. Like, a
little cringe. Maybe how will it go over with the administration? So
I said, like, go to the department. I'm currently the department chair at UMF, but obviously I wasn't in my first year. So I said, go to the department chair, and and she said yes. And so that's how that course started. And I feel like that's kind of common in the psychology program at UMF. Like when there's a student interest, we answer that by providing a course. So in the fall, we're offering a forensic psychology class, and that's really been driven by student interest.
Yeah, I think that's happened here too. A lot of the students here, we have a forensic psychology class, and it's certainly one of the most popular.
It is.
People are coming in having watched the television shows, and
yes,
and of course there's the moving that along to what really is the complete breadth of forensic psych.
Yeah.
And but what a great opportunity at UMF to, if they have an idea, they can actually go to the faculty and say, they don't see it in the catalog, but then say, I would really like to get a class on this. And you respond by giving them a class.
Yeah.
That's very cool. That's very cool.
I'm trying to think if there are any other unique classes. We do a psych and cinema,
Nice.
Which is a fun course for students. We've done positive psychology. Yeah.
I think too, what I'm hearing too is those classes, some of them, we have some of those classes too, but they don't get offered very often. So sometimes our students miss out.
Yeah.
They can only take the forensic psych class, but they want to take the positive psych class. But then the idea is if they transfer to your institution, they might be able to take it there.
Yes. Yeah.
And I know that I encourage a lot of our students to reach out to the place that they want to go.
Yeah.
Early.
Yeah.
And if you have it on your list already, or as the chair, we're probably going to offer that class sometime in the spring. Sometimes they can plan around that and take the one they can take here.
That's a great idea. And then definitely get in touch with us and we'd be happy to do that. Yeah. That's a great idea.
You can take all my advising load and you can take everybody needs to go to Farmington so I don't have to work with you anymore. So that's
I'd actually be happy to start advising, some people who were interested in continuing at Farmington after KVCC. That makes a lot of sense to start thinking.
I think too, one of the best things, and you really covered it well when you introduced what you do, is at KV, we have two programs that are similar to one another. One is our mental health program, mental health rehabilitation. And then we have psych. And actually, I designed the psych program very traditionally. There are a number of students, however, that they want to be in psych. They don't want to be in mental health, but they are interested in clinical, which is different than going into the mental health program. And so people who are interested in a clinical objective in their career would do well to go to Farmington because of that. You have I've at an undergraduate level teaching couples therapy. I didn't have that opportunity to do any therapy undergraduate.
Right. So in our Dan Siebold teaches our intro to counseling class, and he does that with a lot of practice of like counseling skills. When I teach couples therapy, I'm not expecting students obviously to be counseling couples. It's very I consider it sort of a high level of counseling.
But they can learn about it.
Yes, they learn about it. And what's cool is they learn about relationships. And that's such an important area to learn about when you're, well, actually at any stage of life, I would say, even for someone who's, practiced as a couples therapist and teaches a course in couples therapy. I make mistakes all the time in my own relationship, and there's a lot that people can learn. And certainly for our more traditionally aged, like younger students in their 20s, I think it's a great thing to be
learn it before. Maybe they can prevent some of the mistakes we made. I know sometimes I'm teaching things and like, I wish I was taught that.
Right. Yeah.
Before. Pretty early before I made those mistakes myself.
I feel like in high school we should learn about love and we should learn about money, and we don't really learn about either of those,
Well, on that, my high school had a home economics. And you had to learn how to do laundry and balance a checking account. And I don't think that really exists anymore, but it was one of those things that in the end, my mom taught me to do those things, but in the end, it was very useful to have those practicals along with how to manage relationships.
Right. Yeah.
Very cool. Now, one of the things that we don't have that I think is involved in the Farmington program is some sort of practicum or internships
Mm,
of some kind. You talk a little bit about
yeah.
those opportunities.
Yeah. So we don't require one for our program, but we have a lot of students who choose to do one. Um, and I think it's a great idea to do that as part of the undergraduate degree. So we've had students work as behavioral health professionals.
Okay.
So that's getting some, um, practice
That's
in
some
the
real world stuff right
helping.
there.
It's
Yeah.
real world stuff, practice in the helping field. Um, Great to have that experience if you're planning on going into do a master's in social work or in counseling. I think admissions committee really look for that kind of experience.
And those become um those are elective courses that they could create or they could
Yeah,
create.
so we have an internship class and you can do it for however many credits you
Okay.
want. So I think one credit requires 37.5 hours in the field. So then, I have some students who will do up to a 16 credit internship,
Wow.
which would be like full time in the
Full time. Yeah.
summer or full time in a semester. Mm-hmm.
That's a lot
And
of experience too, and possibly career defining
mm-hmm.
to find out if it's really what they want to get into.
Yes, it's so important, I think, to get some experience like that in order to.
So, what kind of help do you provide students who are interested in going on and getting their master's degree or their PhD?
Yeah, so we advise and we mentor students. I think I went to a, much larger university, and what I love about Farmington and the reason I chose to teach there is that we can have close relationships with
Yep.
students and we can really get to know them well, and we have the time to sit down with them. Our department is housed in a renovated church, which is sort of interesting for a psychology program. But what's nice is that it's only psychology in that building, and we just got a $10,000 donation from the grandparent of an alum who knew that their grandchild had just really benefited from like hanging out in the psych building and
Nice.
being mentored by the psychology faculty, and so the money allowed us to buy some new computers, some new couches, to
Nice.
get a coffee maker, just to make that a really inviting space for
Place
students.
to hang out for
A place to hang out. Yeah. And what was the question?
helping them look at graduate school.
Oh yeah,
And
yep. So we can work with them really one-on-one to help with those choices. We also have a career center that I always send them
yep.
to work on practice, getting their resume done and practice with interviews.
Yep.
And 3 years ago, we started our own Masters of Counseling program. And it's to train students to be licensed clinical professional counselors to get their LCPC license in Maine. And so, I have an advisee now who already knows that that's what she wants to do. And she's only in her first year, but she's a strong student. So I was able to say to her, why don't we talk with Lisa Henry, who's our program director and an amazing person with over 20 years experience in the counseling field in Maine. Why don't we talk to her about where you might intern in your undergraduate degree that'll really kind of prepare you for the master's program. So that's a nice connection. If any of you are interested in getting your master's in counseling, I encourage you to consider Farmington. We train students in the foundational counseling skills and theories, but in addition, we have a focus on creative arts. Ooh. And the idea there is just to give students, some other tools that can work when talk therapy isn't the most effective for a given client, or maybe if you're working with children or people with different disorders where they might benefit from some
That's neat. I have
expressive arts.
I have an interest in that. At one time, I wanted to be a music therapist.
Oh yeah.
And found out I wasn't a good enough musician to be a good. They have to be really
be
good.
A musician to be a music therapist?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but I got interested in the various expressive therapies, and I went to UMA, and they have the art program there, and there was this not a really formal art therapy thing, but there was a couple classes that they had going on, and I've had a couple students who have been interested. They've been artists themselves, and what a great combination of their artistic expression and being able to help people at the same time.
Yeah. So some of our master's students come because of that focus on creative arts. They really want to integrate counseling with the arts. And we have Bodhi Simpson, who teaches in our program and also practices in that area, which is very cool. Some of our students are less interested in the arts, and that's fine because it's sort of like a bonus that you're getting, but you don't actually have to use it after, right? Like part of the program is discovering what your orientation is and how you want to work with people. So, but we also can help students, prepare applications for other programs in schools. And we're certainly not biased to directing them to our program at all. It's really about like, what's the right fit for you? What's your interest? We have one student who's, he's actually at an R1 institution doing his PhD in experimental psychology. And I think that's another area that we're really strong in, that, all students, and I know you have a research methods program as well, where your students do a project. So, having that opportunity to have an idea, think about how you want to test it, design a study, collect the data, analyze. It's just such a cool experience to have, I think, at the undergraduate level. And some of our students are interested in going down that track.
Yeah, and I think it kind of gives people an opportunity to see where this knowledge comes from, and that it's imperfect.
Yeah.
And we critique it.
Yes, and it's important, because when you read articles in the New York Times, like don't base your understanding on that, because they don't do a good job of translating the research into. So I think having those classes helps students understand the limitations. Yes.
Now, I'd like to ask you some final questions that really kind of relate, I think, to what you were talking about, your new couches and your new space. I worked at the Upward Bound program at Farmington. For a while, and familiar with that. And we have people that work here that went to Farmington, and I experienced, and they experienced, a very unique social culture. They're very close knit. Family sort of environment, and I think many of the students here actually refer to KVCC in that same way. We're a very small school. They get to work with faculty. We have small classes. We get to know people on a personal basis. So what would a student expect in terms of that continuance going into Farmington? It's a bigger school, and it's a university now. But how is it still home?
So I think all of the faculty would say, what makes our jobs meaningful is the students, and like hearing from students years after they've graduated is just so wonderful. And I would say it's like the favorite part of my job, like department meetings or like committee work. Not so fun. Not so fun. But meeting with students and teaching students is why we're there. And the salaries aren't high at UMF for faculty. Like, we're there because we're passionate about what we do, and we really want that opportunity to get to know students. So one thing I will say is some students really take advantage of that. So they stop by just to chat, which we encourage all of them to do, and they feel comfortable doing that, or they come with friends. And so it is when students take advantage of it and come to the building to see us. And I think with COVID, that kind of set that back. So by refurbishing this lounge and we're trying to get back into that in-person community. It very much, when I interviewed, I mean, that's what convinced me to go to move my family to a different country, was that environment. And it hasn't changed. And
well, it's also interesting too that in the mere time of you doing an interview, you recognize that it must be very apparent.
Yes.
There. For that community must be apparent. You could just see it in a day.
Yeah.
That you were coming in for your interview.
It might have helped that I showed up with my husband and at the time I had one son who was 3. And so
carrying a little kid around.
Yeah, when I was scheduling the interview, actually, she said, some people come with their families, some come alone. And I said, I think I'll come alone. It's an interview and I want to be in the right space. And after I got off the phone with her, I went to my husband and my son and I said, that I had this interview. And my husband turned to my son and said, "We're going to Maine." And I was like, okay, I guess they're coming. But actually they needed to come because they needed to see the area and he needed to know whether
for them too.
Exactly. Whether they could live there. So
well, very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for coming in today and sharing everything about Farmington. And just so everybody knows, we do have a articulation agreement with Farmington. And what that means is they've already looked at all of our classes, matched them up with classes that they have in their program. So transferring is a breeze. Everything has been sort of pre-approved in a way. So if any of you are interested in attending the University of Maine at Farmington after you're done here at KV, then please reach out either to you directly.
Yeah, if you could send them all my email, that would be great.
Yeah, I can follow up with that. And even if you're just curious, even if you might have your heart set on something else, it's always good to explore something. You never know that you might visit that.
Yeah, come visit. It's not far too to come visit UMF.
You might go there and find it very charming, which I did. I found the town charming. I find Twice Told Tales is the used bookstore. My favorite title of a store ever. Twice Told Tales. And nice little shops and nice little restaurants and they have sports and they have campus life and all of those things. So if people are into that. So thank you again.
Thank you
again. And again, if you are interested in anything related to Farmington, reach out. I'll be sending out the email and contact information for Farmington following the publication of this video, and we'll see you next time.